Is back to study time again. And the thank you very much. The handout in front of you is not really a mistake. It is indeed the same handout we used last week, and I thought we could dig into that a little bit more. I apologize. I think I crammed an awful lot of information at you in a short amount of time, and it's pretty exciting stuff to me. But getting all that for the first time, it could be pretty overwhelming, I think, and difficult to absorb. So I'm going to go back, add some more details, and cover some of that. I think this is actually part 7 of Advanced Heresy 502. Is that correct? Is this part 7? I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure it is. So, got a question for y'all. If you're fishing and your fishing line gets all tangled up like a rat's nest, are you more inclined to patiently sit down and work out all the tangles and knots in that fishing line, or to cut it and start fresh? It depends on if the fish are biting. So how many of you would say, nope, that's good line, it just needs some patience, and it's my fault for getting it tangled, and I deserve to sit here and untangle it, so I'm going to patiently do that? How many of you? Raise your hand. All right. I mean, to a point. All right. Okay. How many of you would say, nope, if it's not a simple couple of knots that I can get out in a few seconds, I will not deal with the frustration. I'm not going to spend my patience on that. I'm just going to cut it and start fresh with some more line. How many of you are like that? All right. So what do you think it is? Oh, wait, and how many of you would say fishing? I'm not doing that. I forgot that third category. So what do you think it is that makes the difference between the person who will patiently sit there and work it out, or the person who's like, no way, man, I'll quit fishing before I'll do that, right? Okay, the time available. Okay, so you think it's more the availability of time to the individual than it is about how their brain is wired and how their personality sparks. Okay.
I worry about the line being weak.
Oh, see, yeah.
I've lost a few big fish. Nobody believes it, but I've lost.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Probably those that sit there and untangle it and spend lots of time can't catch fish sitting.
They do that because they can't catch any fish. Yeah. So, boy, I learned a little bit about fishing this past week. First of all, we hosted this fishing tournament dinner for the Fishers of Men. It's a Christian fishing tournament series. It's a national circuit, and they have 2 a year on Table Rock. But the other one isn't here. It's down at Shell Knob. But and we got to host a dinner for them, and they had their speakers and all that. I got to speak a little bit too, and so I learned a little bit about some fishing tips from those guys, for one. And then we had a pro fisherman speak at the men's breakfast the next morning, and learned some really good stuff. Did y'all know, is it the crappie are going to be spawning like 2 weeks ahead? They're getting up in the shallow water way ahead of time this year. That's a good sign for spring weather, I think. Yeah, so if you haven't got out to fishing, this is a good time to do it. But I'll get back to our series here, the lesson I'm supposed to be doing. We're not going to talk fishing, I guess. Fishing talk's always good talk, right? So I want to start in with some of this. There's two things I want to deal with to begin with, okay? One is I want to track a little bit on Joseph of Arimathea, our Joseph the Tin Man. Right. Is there a song written about Joseph was a tin man? There are. Is that song in existence today and being performed still? Yes. And it dates back centuries upon centuries, does it not? Yeah. Have you any of you ever heard the British hymn Jerusalem? I'd prefer not to. Right now, I don't think I can recall the melody. What I will do is I'll bring you a video of that next time around, okay? Not that song, no. No, no. It is like the official anthem of Great Britain. But the first verse of that, it talks about Joseph and Jesus visiting and walking in England when Jesus was but a lad. Very much like the song, Joseph Was a Tin Man. It has some of that same content, although in Jerusalem it's more of a theological or spiritual approach to that. But both songs are legendary lyrics that carry down the history of some of those events. So the two things I want to do in kind of starting this, then we'll just kind of go where it goes. I want to get back to our guy Joseph there. He is, in my opinion, one of the greatest heroes of all history. He's mentioned in all four of the Gospels, but very little is said about him actually right there in the Bible. But if you learn to read between the lines, name of the series, by the way, and you get better at discovering things that are hidden in plain sight, you'll find that there's all kinds of stuff right there. Just like, and I've tried to give some examples of that to improve your skills and interest in finding the stuff that's hidden in plain sight. For example, I gave you the right spelling of the word Palatium Britannicum. You can look that up on Google. You can look it up in any set of encyclopedias, and you look it up and you just look through the results you get on that. You will get a wealth of information on the very stuff that I'm telling you, okay? So it's not like I've got some secret research or anything. Anybody can find all of this. It's hidden in plain sight. You read between the lines, you find the clues, you research the clues, and it all comes out of hiding, just like that. It's not 10 layers deep, it's 2 or 3 layers deep, just to find it. You start turning over those rocks, and you just keep finding more and more once you get started. So, back to our man Joseph. A little bit more on him. One, he was considered to be from Ramathaim Zophim, or which was similar to Ramah that you read about in the Old Testament, but Ramathaim Zophim was an area and a town there, and that was the home of Samuel in the Old Testament. And he was said to have been from there, not very far from Jerusalem or Bethlehem or any of those areas in Galilee right there at all. And that's what the Arimathea comes from. Some people said it was because he was a descendant of Matthias or Mathat, and that the Arimathea was from that. I don't think so much as it is the Ramathaim Zophim in 1st and 2nd Chronicles and 1st, 2nd Samuel too. But it's mentioned a few times and referred to as the home of Samuel as well. But get this. Do you guys know that Joseph, the Tin Man, Joseph of Arimathea, has another name too? And you can research him using any of these names. Here's the other one. Joseph de Marmor. Marmore is the spelling I have. Marmore. But there's an alternative spelling as well. I'll share in just a minute. Because he had a place and was considered a resident of Marmorica in Egypt. That's on the northern coast there of Egypt, and that would be west of the Nile and the things that you've studied historically there, probably almost all the way to the western boundary of Egypt on the Mediterranean. Again, having a place there, that's probably related to his merchant and trading business and so forth. I was reading more and more on that. There are stories of him traveling, as you would guess, all of the Mediterranean, the European coast, and down through the Indian Ocean and that area, of course, to India. But there's also plenty of stories of him trading in South America before it was called America. Isn't that kind of cool? Okay, so the alternative spelling is of Marmorica is Marmarica, Marmarica, but most of the spellings are Marmorica. Still placed there. You can look it up. You can go there. They do tourist stuff and all that. So that was his other name. You can look him up by that name, and you'll find it will go immediately to you know, if you do an online search, your search engine will immediately bring up tons of results for Joseph of Arimathea. Okay, and in those you'll actually find some references to Joseph the Tin Man, which is the name I prefer. It's the most fun of all three, right? Of course it is. That was long before the Wizard of Oz. Did y'all know that Buddy Ebsen was the first person they wanted to be the Tin Man on Wizard of Oz? You remember why he didn't? He was allergic to that paint. It was like an aluminum paint or something they used and everything, so he couldn't do it. And so he lost his casting on that. He was another Tin Man. Yeah.
What book of the Bible was that?
That was deep in between the lines. All right. So there's a little bit more about our guy Joseph. Now, let's just do a little talk through. I'll just walk through a little bit of the high points in his life as I see it, okay? Many of your historical records will say that he was the uncle of Mary. I still contend he's the brother of Mary, although you'll find very, very few sources to support that. You've got to get back earlier than about the 4th century, because it's like they did a flip about on everything about then, and I told you a little bit of the theological reasons for that. But I am still convinced that he is the brother of Mary, and again, Luke's gospel tells us Joseph, the son of Heli, you know, Heli Joachim, and therefore he wasn't Heli's brother, he was his son. So far as that goes. So, when Joseph the Tecton, who was the husband of Mary, died, we believe Jesus was around 14-ish. He could have been a little bit younger, as young as 13, but right in there. And therefore, Joseph, our Tin Man, assumed the legal responsibility of father for his sister's children, including Jesus. And that's why it says he was, according to custom, the father of Jesus. And that's worded a few different ways in each translation in Luke chapter 3. Some will say, as was supposed. Others will say, according to custom, or different things like that. Look it up, think about it carefully, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But he was born into a family of great wealth, as was his sister Mary, of course, with Heli being extremely wealthy man, and in the merchant business as well. Heli and his business partner, between them, controlled basically the world supply of grain from where they were there in Israel. And of course, there was shipping going on and lots of stuff like that. And by the way, have I mentioned y'all how fascinated I am with the ability of the ancient world to communicate in ways that we don't even quite grasp? Now, I don't think the peasants really knew much of what was going on to speak of, other than, but the elites, the wealthy, the people that were, of either royal status or extreme wealth, or that usually meant both, they go together, they seem to have eyes and ears all over the world and ways of getting the information back and forth at incredible speed, and even coordinating meetings and things like that. Pretty surprising. But these two guys, Eliakim and his partner, do y'all remember who I told you his partner was? Another rich dude. Nicodemus. Yes, there you go. But basically the grain supply of the known world was controlled by these guys. That's pretty amazing level of wealth. That's not, you've got a fat bank account. That's generational wealth, where your great-grandchildren will never have to work. Right? And that was the whole world. No middle class in first century. Nobody ever heard of such a thing. You had the dirt poor, with little variation within that, and then you had the elites, those who had wealth and means, and of course they all had generational wealth, but it was a very, very small slice of the overall population. So Joseph, our tin man, was born into this kind of wealth. His nephew Jesus was also born into the same family. This is a hard one to get your head around after years and years of years about hearing how poor he was and how he was a refugee and how his mom was a poor peasant and all this kind of stuff. But it's impossible. You can't have one of the wealthiest families in the world give birth to a poor peasant girl. Right? So anyway, Joseph at a very young age begins making his way as a trader, and he is primarily getting copper and mostly tin ore from what was the Scilly Isles, or the British Isles in the area of Cornwall. And again, more fascination on my part here, and that is the people he was trading with there were Jews. Where did they come from? How did they get there? They had been there a few hundred years at that point. They were well established there. I'm telling you, this is good stuff, isn't it? Well, yeah, God never lost any of them, but God has always known where everybody is. But this is a whole different study, but I'm going to give you just a little bit of bait on this, okay? Jesus commissioned the 70, or some would argue 72, and he sent them out, and he said, "Go only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." That is very specific wording. Now, none of the house of Israel were living in the land of Israel at that time. Israel was the northern kingdom. That's the house of Israel. The house of Judah was the southern kingdom, right? Now, by the time Nebuchadnezzar overran Jerusalem and took captive from the southern kingdom for the 70-year exile and all that, it had been like 200 years that Assyria had already conquered the house of Israel, the northern kingdom, and they didn't return. Now, we can track their travelings and where they settled and all of this. I've got a couple of great studies that do all of that, but these people that are over in Western Europe now in the first century are from the lost sheep of the house of Israel. They were dispersed at the time of the Assyrian conquest, and they ended up all over the world. But great numbers of them were in Western Europe, and now the descendants of them. And that is why most of those countries by the first century and even earlier had ambassadors in Israel. They wanted to keep an eye on everything that was happening there and know about it. They had ambassadors in Jerusalem. Almost all of these European countries did, because it was their homeland. They don't teach you this in history in high school or college usually. But that's some of my fascination with, they were already in communication with all these people, and Joseph was there trading to get the ores that they had mined and smelted. He was trading those pretty much all over the world. And I don't know how many ships he had, but he had a few that were constantly moving about and traveling. And yeah, I believe Jesus traveled with him somewhat. I believe it's entirely plausible that Jesus' formal education took place there in the British Isles as well. Julius Caesar attended those. Most of the very wealthy in those days in the Middle East would go to one of those schools, and many of those were the universities the Druids had founded in Western Europe and in Britain, especially there in Cornwall. There was a multitude of those schools, and the founding of those schools was originally of Hebrew descent. The Druids came out of the Hebrew background as well. So again, it makes a whole lot of sense that that's where he got his formal education. He certainly went somewhere. And he had been gone a long time, because when he started showing up, people were saying, wait a minute, who is this? Isn't that the son of that guy who was a carpenter, or this? In other words, he was away. And then when he started his ministry, he was a new arrival coming back to town, you know. So our guy Joseph of Arimathea is part of this picture all the way along from day one. And we'll skip ahead and just cover just a few things real briefly here. There's at one point a story where they came in at Cornwall in low tide. Their ship ran aground. They got stuck a few days. The legend is that Joseph and his nephew and the others that were with them built a house, a building there out of stick, and it's like wattle and yeah, well, it's just wattle. It's a mud clay that they put into a stick construction and just stick it like that, the wattle type building. And it was there for quite some time, I guess. So that happened before the crucifixion of Jesus, probably during his teen years, or in his 20s even, perhaps. So after the crucifixion, it's Joseph who goes and claims the body of Jesus. Remember, he goes and asks Pontius Pilate for the body of Jesus. How many people do you think there were around who could have asked for the body of Jesus and got it? Well, again, Nicodemus may not have been able to, because he wasn't a relative. But he did, who was part of this. It had to be the nearest male relative. It's potentially true that one of the half-brothers could have done this, but they were all younger too, you know. But Joseph did, and Pontius Pilate surrendered the body of Jesus to him, and he has the body buried in his tomb there on his property, and which everybody there was familiar with anyway, because Jesus and all them were all around that area. They were familiar with the property of Nicodemus, of Joseph's place, Heli's place, all of this. But who attended the burial of Jesus with Joseph of Arimathea, his uncle? Do you remember I named 4 people the Bible lists who were present? Okay, there were 2 Marys and 2 men. 2 men and 2 Marys. Okay, and Jim already named the 2 guys. You had Joseph the Tin Man, and you had his good friend and a good friend of his father, Nicodemus. Okay? And the 2 Marys. Which 2 Marys do we have? Okay. You got Mary the Magdalene, or Magdalene as we say, and Mary the mother of Jesus. Those are the 4 people present at the burial of Jesus. Why those 4 people? What connection would they have had? They're family. They're family. Immediate, well, very close family at least. They, occupied the same space for years, and that's just how it was. And honestly, for years and years, reading through those accounts in the Gospels, I never got that. Who's this Joseph? Well, he's there because he's the rich guy who's offering his tomb to poor Jesus, right? And Nicodemus, well, he was I don't know why he was there. And of course, his mother would have been there, and who knows why Mary Magdalene would have shown up. But now that we've dug into these people's lives and know the background and everything, it makes perfectly good sense that those would be the 4 people. Why weren't all of his disciples there? Anybody want to take a stab at that one? They ran for their lives. They were hiding. You better believe it. Exactly. John Boy? Well, he ended up in hiding with the others too as we read on, I think. But no, he wasn't there, was he? Yep. Apparently not. He wasn't named anyway. So.
See, that's odd to me because he was going to take care of Mary.
Maybe.
Did he not take care of Mary?
I don't think so.
Really?
Right?
Well, that's just odd because Jesus asked him.
Yeah. And I don't know much about John. I'm going to have to do another deep dive and find out more about John because we've got an odd mix here. You've got this guy, Jesus, who's, first of all, born into extreme wealth. Secondly, had the Magi come give him even greater wealth that would have probably lasted generations. And he decides he wants some people to hang out with, and he goes down to the lake and grabs some fishermen. Those guys probably aren't from extreme wealth.
And Jesus asks one of those fishermen to be with his mom. That's kind of
Well, again,
He was so rich. Because John wasn't rich.
I know. That's what I was getting at. He couldn't take care of a princess, I mean, it's laughable almost.
Yeah, but maybe Jesus wasn't thinking of money, monetary. He was thinking more of maybe love.
Yeah. But anyway, that'll be, again, another of these other studies we're going to have to get into because there's some good stuff in that. There really is. It's not just one of those odd questions that we can't really answer. There's cool stuff there, all right? So things progress along. And Pontius Pilate is a pretty close associate of Joseph of Arimathea. Remember, Joseph is also a Roman official. Nobilis decurium is how they refer to him. And we dig into it a little bit, and he was like manager of Rome's mining districts. Therefore, he was no small official there. He was big stuff, and from a pretty young age, actually. But he was in the perfect position for that. But Pontius Pilate is reassigned, removed out of Israel in 36 AD. And there's been this push of persecution from the Sanhedrin, the high priest Caiaphas, and all of those. They had already once, if I understand right, had got Joseph jailed, and he got out, and they couldn't find grounds to imprison him again. He had enough clout, enough connection and everything, especially with Pontius Pilate. Once Pontius Pilate's gone, the persecution intensifies. We read about some of that in the book of Acts. And that's when and if I understand this right, they didn't just do this with Joseph and those few with him. They had done this with others as well. And that was, they put them in a boat with no sails, no paddles, no oars, and they would pull them out with obviously either rowed or sail or both, tow them out into the middle of the Mediterranean and just leave them adrift there. Some got rescued, some drifted to some of the Mediterranean islands or something, but many died that way. And I'd given you a list of the people. There's actually a song and a poem written about this, the ones who were with Joseph when they were exiled out to the Mediterranean. But he ends up leaving Israel, and he's out on the Mediterranean. He first makes landfall in northern Africa, and it could have been back there in Marmorica. It's hard to say, but I'm thinking it was a little further west than that. Nevertheless, with connections that he had when he made some landfall, he arranged passage for he and his companions to go to France. Gaul, it was called at the time. And again, some of this incredible communication that's taking place, there were two different delegations that met with them when they arrived there in Gaul. First one, Philip the evangelist. You read about him in Acts chapter 8, if you recall that. He met there, and a delegation from King Caractacus or Caradactus, whichever pronunciation you choose, from the area in Britain where Joseph had got so much of his ore and trading, where they had built the Wattle House at that one time when they were stuck there longer than planned. The king had offered him free land for him and all of his companions. Have you ever heard of the measurement of land called hides of land? This was an old British thing. It was 40 hides, and I don't remember how many acres to a hide or whatever, you can look it up, that were to be theirs forever, their descendants tax-free. Still on the books there, by the way. He did go there and began sharing the gospel. The royal family were some of his first audience, and remember the chart I'd given you. King Caractacus and his children were some of the first to respond. Another one, though, that is no small player in some of this, but not mentioned nearly as much, is Caractacus' father, Bran. And he was a believer also and responsible for much of the early Christian influence there in Britain and helping to protect the Christians later. So in Joseph's teaching there, the royal family is brought into the picture. Linus and Gladys, two of them, a son and a daughter. Now, Gladys, everybody talks about how incredibly brilliant she was and how beautiful that she was. And of course, as you know, as we talked about, Rufus Pudens, the Roman officer who then became a senator, was from a wealthy family as well, ends up marrying Gladys, okay? But Gladys, we're told, was the very first person Joseph baptized there in Britain. I don't know if that's true or not, but why not, right? Somebody had to be. And I don't think he made notes on it necessarily. Haven't found those. But through all the goings on with Caractacus being captured, taken to Rome, his family, and all of this, Emperor Claudius was smitten with his daughter Gladys, adopts her in their exile there in Rome, if you recall. That's where they ended up, in the Palatium Britannicum, which I also call the British Embassy in Rome. I don't think anybody else said that. I just made that up. Makes sense to me, right? Right. And he makes her his adoptive daughter, and she then takes on a new Roman name, which is Claudia. So Gladys then becomes Claudia, okay? Joseph continues to live out a long life there in Glastonbury, teaching and training missionaries and sending them literally all over the world and having them bring back their journals, their records, and also manuscripts of interest from the other parts of the world where they are. And that's where the huge library there, which was The closest year I've got, it was destroyed by fire in 1184. Glastonbury Abbey is the location of that. As I understand it, the epitaph in Joseph's tomb is still there at the new abbey at Glastonbury. Interesting, isn't it? But so now we're getting to the second part of what I wanted to. Here's where these two connect. In 2 Timothy 3:21, let me make sure I'm giving you the right scripture reference on that, okay? Say what? 1184. But the scripture reads, it says this, do your best to get here before winter. Eubulus greets you, and so do Pudens, Linus, Claudia, and all the brothers and sisters. Paul is at that point in Rome. This is one of what we call the prison epistles, which again, I was blown away when I found out what kind of prison it really was. It's a palace, for crying out loud. With servants. I mean, this just changes it all for me. But so he's writing to Timothy, and he says, do your best to get here before winter. Eubulus greets you, and so do Pudens, Linus, Claudia, and all the brothers and sisters. Now, we've covered to some degree who Pudens is. Help me out. Who's Pudens? Tell me one fact you know about Pudens. Okay, Paul's half-brother. Excellent. What else? He what? Roman officer, and then become a Roman senator as well. Okay. What else do you know about Pudens? He married Claudia. Yes. Okay. And the account of that wedding is told by a first century writer who was also a close friend of Pudens, named by the name of Martial. You can look it up. It's an incredible, elaborate description of their wedding, interestingly enough. Okay. So you know who Pudens is now, right? Rufus Pudens. Okay. How about Linus? Who is Linus? Claudia's brother, and they are both the children of a king by the name of, yeah, actually, it'll throw you. There's Caradactus, same guy, Caractacus. Two different pronunciations of the same guy, okay? And so you've got Linus and Claudia, who are brother and sister, who have got the gospel back in Britain from Joseph of Arimathea, and now they're at Rome, in the center of all the Roman population, leading people to Christ and leading a church that has been forming there for a few years now. Pretty awesome stuff, right? And then, of course, Claudia's husband, Rufus Pudens, he's part of this too. But there's a fourth person mentioned in this that I don't want to overlook. Eubulus. The first one named, as far as that goes. Any of you want to take a stab at this guy, Eubulus, or just for fun, or you want me to just launch this? All right. His name is also Aristobulus. But by either name, he was the first bishop in Britain. And yet somehow spent a lot of time in Rome. Here's what I keep discovering is the ongoing strong connection between Britain and Rome. It just goes on and on and on. Okay, I'm going to give you something else on that. No, wait, let me go back to Aristobulus, Eubulus, okay? His brother was a guy named Barnabas. A guy named Barnabas that Paul knew. Barnabas went to Britain as well. He followed his brother Aristobulus, Eubulus, there, but he later left, went other places too. One more thing I'm going to tell you about our friend Eubulus/Aristobulus. He is also said to have been, trumpet sound please, drum roll. All right. All right. Father-in-law to Peter the Apostle. Now, I rejected this, but there's maybe some merit to it. He is sometimes identified as a guy named Zebedee. Zebedee, father of James the Less. Two of the fisher guys. Well, I said I sort of rejected that because I couldn't substantiate it, but there are sources that claim he is the one and the same with Eubulus Aristobulus. I don't really totally buy that myself, but it is out there. You'll run across that if you're digging into this stuff. Interesting, isn't it? So there's our other person, the fourth person mentioned in that passage of Scripture. But now I'm going to give you one, just an odd aside thing here. Do you recall last week, if you were looking at your little organizational chart of who's who and all of that, and I told you a couple of omissions I had made on it. One of them was I knew that Caradactus had other children besides the one I'd mentioned, but after I made that, I had learned of at least one more that I didn't have on it. Y'all remember me saying that? And his name was Silenus, Cyllinus in our modern English spelling. Silenus, okay? And at first I was like, is this the same guy as Linus? And so, nope, because as soon as you start reading about him, it talks about his martyred brother, Linus, the Bishop of Rome, okay? So, nope, it's definitely not him, but there's his brother. Silenus, of course, went back to Britain with some of the family as well, but he also had you're going to like this. He had a son named Cole, Coel. Built a big fortress in Colchester there in Sussex. But if the legend of old King Cole, that's our man. That's our man. But that's not the good part. Cole has a daughter named Helen. Okay, Silenus, son named Cole. Okay, some people call him King. All right, okay. And he has a daughter named Helen. Guess who Helen married? Constantine. You know the Hellenization that took place through Constantine? It was all about his mother named Helen, right? Well, that's where Helen, I'm sorry, I said she married Constantine. She was his mother of Constantine. Sorry, yeah.
Helen was the mother.
Of Constantine. Yep. Now, what I'm getting at, back on this theme, the connection that just keeps going between Britain and Rome, especially a little area back then called Glastonbury at Cornwall, that little area. And it was like there was a hotline between Rome and that little spot in Britain there. Pretty surprising though, isn't it? Janet, yes. That would have been around 67, 66 or 67. I might be off a year or two on that. Because, see, Paul had gotten free and went and even traveled after his imprisonment. Okay, but he had gone free and even traveled, they said, to the west. I'm suspecting he went to Britain. That's where everybody else is going. This must be a law. You got to do that. But he returned in 67, and shortly after that, he was executed there, or martyred, in 68. So I'm thinking Nero started his reign of persecution around 67 or so. That's what I'm basing it on. Well, apparently it didn't completely sever that, because you're looking at what? 2, maybe 3 generations later, where the British Helen is the mother of Constantine, who becomes the Emperor of Rome. So apparently they were still pretty strong even then. What's really interesting is you've got some 4th and really 5th century stuff where Rome, with their new form of Christianity, Rome is attempting to Christianize Britain in the 5th century. Now, where was the first church building built and the congregation established outside of Israel after the crucifixion of Christ and so forth? It was the one at Glastonbury, Joseph. And of course, a lot of people have claimed the church at Rome was. However, evidence goes toward the one at Britain there, predating that. And remember what I told you last week, there was potentially 2 separate congregations there in Rome initially that eventually united. There was the church that was booming and thriving, led by the British royalty, where Paul was staying and helping with that for some time, all of that going on. And then there was also the church of Hebrews that were meeting in secret and underground, that eventually merged in with the other church. I can't remember the name of the 3rd bishop there, though, but that's when that took place, because he was actually from the other group there. So they had to at that point. So there's a little bit of a walkthrough on our guy Joseph, and I wanted to go to that scripture in 2 Timothy and the people that are named there. That is not an insignificant thing that's going on with Paul naming these individuals. It's pretty important, of great significance, I would say. And if you look, I kind of given you a little bit of a timeline of events from that handout last week. And you can kind of see the order of some of these things as well. But I would say when Paul first arrives in Rome, and it's close to 62 then, it was in AD 50 that Linus and Claudia came and probably began their evangelizing and even gathering some who were already believers at that point. So when Paul arrives, they had close to 12 years, 11 or 12 years of this church growth and leadership going on there where they were staying in Rome. And so, I mean, what I'm getting at is there's a big debate as to whether it was Peter or Paul who started the church at Rome. Who can you rule out based on what you know right now? Well, remember, it was there 12 years when Paul got there, so we're kind of ruling him out, right? And then you guys ruling out Peter, how you doing that?
I saw a guy on YouTube talking about it, that's why.
Yeah. I warned y'all, don't let anybody watch this stuff. Jim.
Well, he was in that other Baptist Methodist, other private church.
Well, that is one of the theories. The writer who put that together was looking for a way to create a plausible scenario where Peter could have been at Rome and considered a leader in the church. the evidence doesn't really go behind that. I get what that writer was trying to do, so that's why I wanted to share that, because there's lots of other cool stuff tied in with it. But Paul writing these letters from Rome, and not once does he mention, hey, Peter's here. He said hi, but he's getting greetings from all these other guys, you know. So that's not happening. And the evidence just doesn't point that way. However, if it did, it came along later. But the first bishop at Rome was Linus, the son of Caractacus. And he had been leader there already for a few years. But Paul, shortly after arriving there, now remember, what is one thing Paul's got that none of these other people have got? Well, no, that's true. A lot of them don't have. But he's considered an apostle. He said, as one born out of due time, because the apostles were all those who had direct contact with Jesus, right? But Paul was, as he said, apostle, though one born out of due time, because he didn't know Jesus during his earthly life, okay? But Paul's an apostle. How many apostles do we have today? There aren't any more. These people go carrying on about apostolic succession and all this, and how United Methodist bishops are succeeded all the way back to Peter, the first bishop in Rome, and all this. And I'm like, guys, there's not one shred of truth in any of that. The apostles died and they were gone. But nevertheless, Paul's an apostle. And so he consecrates Linus to give whatever credibility comes from being consecrated by an apostle. And that makes, and I doubt they used the word bishop then. The word would have been one often translated overseer. But also legitimately translated bishop later on. But Linus, definitely our first bishop there at Rome, no question about it. And Rome coming after the first European church established congregation there in Cornwall, Glastonbury. Is that enough information for tonight? Questions? You got time for a question or two? You guys, and I won't know the answer, but I'll pretend. Janet and then Connie.
I'm still thinking about Nero and the persecution of the Christians.
It continued. Real quick snippet on that. That persecution continued throughout Rome up until the time of Constantine in 313 AD. Now, however, I said that form of persecution was Constantine becomes a Roman emperor, and he actually had a great victory at a battle called it was the Battle at Milvian Bridge. They were outnumbered, they were being overwhelmed, and he was General Constantine at that time, and he claims that he saw a symbol of a cross in a big cloud in the sky and the words, "By this sign you shall conquer." Okay, and they won. They devastated the enemy there at the Battle of Milvian Bridge, and he decided that was from God, that he was to be a Christian now, and so he determined himself to be a Christian. He had all the Roman military leaders march all of their troops out into the ocean. He called them down. They're all baptized. They're Christians. Constantine himself did not get baptized until he was on his deathbed because he couldn't figure out what would happen with the sins he committed after his baptism. Somehow he got it in. See, the error of baptismal salvation had already crept in by there in 313 when Constantine came along. So what happens though now is Constantine begins renaming so many of the pagan statues and holidays and all of this of Rome and giving them so many Christian names. He's Christianizing everything around him, okay? and basically called together a big meeting of church leaders of different congregations around, and several of them stayed away because they didn't trust him. But the ones who showed up, he promised them some wealth and different authority and all this sort of thing. But then began a persecution against the other Christians who weren't part of this hierarchy that Constantine established. And that was what eventually became the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church. But that was the precursor to that. But it kind of got started there with that meeting with Constantine. So does that sort of answer your persecution question? Okay. Other question? You were next, Connie.
Paul became an apostle. If he didn't have direct contact with Jesus other than on the road to Damascus, did he name himself? Is that how he was an apostle?
I'm thinking he's basing it on the authority that Jesus gave him. I'm thinking it's that. Look at it carefully. That's what it seems to be. Yeah, but who knows? Maybe he just made the whole thing up. I'll be an apostle too, man. It made it credible because he was so starkly on the other side of this whole thing, you know. He was the guy dragging in Christians to be tortured and killed just a day before this. He was on his way. It said he was yet breathing out threatenings and cursings on his way to Damascus. He was mad. If there was a Christian out there, he's going to find him and kill him, you know, and then this happened. So I kind of believe him. What else? More questions, guys?
Well, did the other apostles approve of Paul?
Correct. That is a factor. You would bring that up. Do I have to launch off of this and say something about... All right. I'm going to get my little dig in here and hope, I'm not even going to regret it at all. One of the things that would have given him credibility was the fact that the other apostles accepted him as another apostle. Okay? Just like in, say, the Council of Bishops today. The credibility of a new bishop is the other bishops accept them. When they did this thing of consecrating bishops who were unqualified, the California Nevada Conference, and they have, there's 3 of them now? All the Council of Bishops had to do was say, and even the Judicial Council ruled it out of order, okay? And yet the person just kept on functioning as bishop and going around and path of destruction and everything they could find, right? Still to this day. All the Council of Bishops needed to do was say, we're not going to work with him. We're not going to work with her because they're not legitimately elected and consecrated bishops because they were never qualified to begin with. Sorry, we don't hate you, but you're not a bishop. They could have done that. They didn't. And here we are, saying bye-bye to them. Yes, sir, Lloyd.
I have a question, because I was always told that criteria to get into the Bible is that you had to have a first account transaction or meeting with Jesus. It had to be a first account. And from what I hear you saying, Paul didn't have that.
Well, it depends. Post-resurrection personal encounter, right? But for the others named apostles, it was because they were directly commissioned under Jesus. But notice this, at one point he directly commissions this 70, maybe 72, and sends them out. Those guys weren't all apostles, just the 12, right? Interesting. I don't have all the answers on that. But somehow, Paul's encounter won him the apostle status, title, whatever. Or acceptance with the others.
The council that the Catholic Church put together to decide what would comprise the Bible.
The canonical tests and so forth, yeah.
I was taught that nothing in the Bible can conflict. It has to be affirmed by more than one source.
There's a whole series of tests like that to determine whether the canonicity of a book is accepted. It wasn't just, we come across these people who say, well, I'm really interested in learning about all those books they threw out of the Bible. Well, no, that didn't happen. You know, they had, you know, like something like the Gospel of Thomas that was written 300 years later, and they're trying to, you know, claim it was written by Thomas, when everybody knows it wasn't the case. But, you know, there weren't any books thrown out of the Bible. There were books that people were using and reading that didn't make the cut, though, but the same criteria is applied to all of them. Yeah.
The Protestant Bible has a couple, but the Catholic Bible doesn't.
Maybe, but you've got the apocryphal books, and as I understand Catholicism on this, they translated those and include them, but not as canonical scripture, in the same level.
Oh, there's another archangel listed in the Catholic
Oh,
books, and they're teaching on purgatory and
yeah, and they do find some basis for that in one of the apocryphal books. Well, yeah, there's Tobit, there's 1st and 2nd Maccabees, there's Daniel and the Dragon, or Bel and the Dragon, but it's about Daniel, which is an awesome book, by the way. Yeah, there's several. There's like 12, I think. Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Loyal. And we've got a few gray, fuzzy areas about this apostleship and stuff there. But one thing's for sure, there's not a bunch of apostles running around today. Is everybody cool with that? All right. Part 7's done, I guess.